Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. This week I want to talk about problems that are on the human scale, if you will. I got a great comment, and they were kind of mentioning that something bugged them about so many of the adventures that are out there. I'm assuming they mean published adventures, and I was talking about creating an adventure, and they said that they need a powerful creature or some kind of god and these high-level characters to take care of it, and rarely, if ever, is there a story that's at the human size, kind of a human-sized problem to take care of. And, I replied back saying, well, in my campaign, there's lots of that. But it did make me think, why is it that when we get a published adventure, or when I'm here making a video and talking about adventure, why is there generally something bigger that we're looking at? We'll talk about that a little bit in this video, and then we'll also talk about creating adventures that are more human scale. Fantasy needs monsters. So obviously I can only speak for myself, and not every designer ever to create an adventure for Dungeons & Dragons or any other fantasy RPG or otherwise. But I think when we're creating an adventure or showing people how to create adventures, the reason why we tend to use some kind of really powerful monster or god or demon or super sorcerer or item is because that's the stuff that makes the epic stories. And I think, and again, this is how it is in my campaign, so please do chime in. I think that those types of stories are peppered in throughout the lifetime, if you will, of a character. If we look at the stories of Conan, written by Robert E. Howard, they are, well, first of all, they were published not in order, right? They didn't start off with Conan as 16 and then they get older. One of the very first stories, if not the first story, Conan is older and already the king. Later, I think maybe the very next one or one within that, they do the Tower of the Elephant where he's very young. And Howard produced them in that order, my understanding is, because he wanted to write them in a way like a great warrior who was now older was telling you stories. They don't tell you their life story in order. They tell you the stories as they come up, the great adventures. They don't talk about the down times, the lulls. Those they pass over with, and I did 3 or 4 months service with the King's Army. And then there was a monster, right? So these are the stories that we are tempted to make. And I think that if you run a nonstop campaign with only these types of stories, with no downtime, with none of that kind of stuff, it does become kind of like what we'll call the Avengers problem. You've probably heard people say that before, where everything just keeps having to get tougher and tougher and tougher, one monster after another. But I wonder, and at least for me, again, I can only speak for myself, if that's how people's campaigns go. Downtime and less epic journeys. So as I said, in my campaign, there's lots of human-sized, if you will, problems. Sure, the party fights the occasional demon or really powerful monster, a hydra or something, but most of what they're dealing with most of the time are, again, human scale. Now, they're not always facing humans. They might be facing a tribe of orcs or goblins or something to that effect, or they might be fighting berserkers or other types of humans, elves, dwarves, whatever. But they're people-sized, right? They're not dragons, they're not gods, they're not incredibly powerful, but in mass they are. And oftentimes, the world itself is the monster or the big bad, if you want to think of it like that. If you enter into a town, let's take Farford and the Grey Mouser, right, from Fritz Leiber. Those amazing stories, if you haven't read them. Lankmar, which is a town or city really, I think probably the biggest city in the world, and that, Nuon, I think it's called. Lankmar in and of itself is a character, right? The city is a character. And a lot of what Farford and the Grey Mouser deal with when they're in the city are parts of that. And dealing with just living day to day in the city, being broke, gambling, getting robbed, getting in trouble. These are a lot of their adventures. And yes, there's, again, it's sword and sorcery. There's magic involved, but it's not always over the top, and it's not always destroy something that's very difficult to destroy. For instance, in Ilmet in Lankmar, which I just recently read, so it's kind of in my mind. Actually, I read the graphic novel adaptation, so it wasn't quite the whole thing. It's been a while since I've heard the actual story, so if I missed part of it or the graphic novel did, forgive me, fans. But basically, Farford and the Grey Mouser, this is their meeting. They meet each other. Farford's girlfriend has a vendetta against the Thieves Guild. The Grey Mouser just likes to steal stuff. And they basically go to the Thieves Guild basically to make havoc, right? And when they're gone, to do that, a sorcerer uses magic, but not like a fireball or whatever. They use magic to, sorry, we got spoilers here, to basically, we'll just say, wreak havoc on something that Farfar and the Grey Mouse are really love, we'll say. And then the story takes a twist and they go back and seek revenge. So again, they are fighting the Thieves Guild. They're fighting thieves. They're fighting people with sling stones and swords and daggers. They do eventually fight a sorcerer, but that fight is very brief, and the sorcerer in and of themselves is not particularly tough. It's these ritual magic spells that are very powerful. So yeah, they're powerful, but really they're just a person, right? And we see that sometimes. Now, to contrast that, sometimes in, let's say, a Conan story like the Scarlet Citadel, I think is the one, where, no, it's, anyways, there's the Conan one, the other one, where Conan basically loses his throne temporarily. And in that one, there's like a super powerful sorcerer that can just kill people by touching them. So both of these things exist. Do we need them both? And how do we use them in our campaign? So I think we talk a lot, and this is kind of what the comment was about the other, right? The demons, the dragons, this kind of stuff. Let's talk about human scale. Setting the stage. One of the most important things when you are running a human scale type enemy or adventure is buy-in from the players. And not just buy-in from the players, but buy-in from the player characters. That is to say that you need players that want to get involved, and it has to also be reasonable for their characters to want to get involved. This generally requires a lot more setup. If I'm sitting down to run a one-shot or kind of a one-shot, and I say, all right, we're going to go and you're going to go to this forest, and there's a ziggurat there, and there's supposed to be some treasure, and it's probably guarded by something, but you want to get that treasure. Cool. That's all the motivation most people need. Most characters can be motivated by that in, most tables I've played at. Even once played with a friend of mine who their character was a merchant background, and they were obsessed with just selling everything. So they would go in there. Sure, they wanted the jewels and stuff, but they were also taking the furniture and strippings and stuff off the walls. So you can always find a fun reason to go to a thing and take the treasure, because that's kind of the heart of a lot of these adventures. But to have somebody want to help, let's say, a village, like really help a village, not help a village by killing the werewolf, but help a village because the king is basically unfair and is taxing them, and one single fight against the king's guards is not going to solve this. It's going to take political machinations. It might require taking people off the throne, figuring out that the count is putting money off to the side. This is something the players have to really want to do. They're not going to want to just ride through that and go, fine, it's one adventure, we'll just kill them and go on. This is something they have to be super involved in. This is why setup is key, and why I said that, sure, I make these adventures like this in the videos, but the reality is at my table, it's not like that. Currently, they are now trying to track down a group of slavers. And sure, there's a bigger story and there's something fantastical about it. But really what's happening is people are being kidnapped and they're being taken away. And the party has decided that's not cool. Again, nobody hired them to do it. I didn't say this is the adventure. They heard rumors, they encountered people, they saw and interacted with NPCs that had suffered under the hands of the slavers and decided they were going to do something about it. And because of that, they are now doing that. Of course, the slavers are hundreds and hundreds of people, and the party is only 6, and they have some henchmen and stuff. So it's not like they can just go, again, stab somebody and walk away. They've got to figure out how to stop this. Even if they killed half the slavers, there's something else going on, right? That's deeper, there's investigation. And this is really what we need to do when we want to do these kind of games. We've got to put out there in the world NPCs that the party can connect with, the party can relate to, and the party wants to help or stop. That is to say, if the party encounters somebody that's a complete jerk, they might want to take that count out, right? It might not even be about justice for the village. It might be like, that count's a jerk and we need to get them out of power. And then as a bonus, the village gets less taxes. But that's the kind of thing that you need to do. So it's not as easy to set up an adventure unless you're going to create lots of backstory, and then it requires a certain kind of player with a certain kind of buy-in for you to sit down and go, here's all this backstory. This is why your character wants to be involved. This is what they're here for. And then a little bit of railroading to make them do it. And I think that's why me, and maybe a lot of people that write published adventures, don't create adventures like that for mass public. We create adventures that are simple things that most people can get behind, that you can kind of manipulate to fit into your campaign. The type of adventure that requires this human connection or human level stuff, it generally requires human connection. And that's not something you can write into an adventure. That's something that has to happen at your table. Human level foes. Beyond that philosophizing, let's just say that you can do what I just said. Well, it's easy enough to set up, number one, a false god or a powerful person. That is a magic user that's not actually super powerful, but just claims to be a god that's not really a god. Wizard of Oz and all that. You could definitely do that if you want to keep that edge. But you can also just have the player characters battling things that are at human level. The question really becomes, though, why are they doing that? I think that a lot of people that play these games, and again, this is just, please comment below, they don't want to play a group of adventurers that go into a town and kill a bunch of humans or elves or dwarves or whatever are the playable species in your campaign. They don't want to be bandits, basically, right? On some level, even if they want to be anti-heroes, they still want to be heroes. They want to help. They want to feel like they're, in the end, have accomplished something good, even if their character's reluctant. So you can't, it's hard to say, so who are the bad guys? So you're going to make a bandit camp and then they're fighting people that are at that level as them. And is that interesting? Again, it is if there's personality involved. So if you're going to do this, what you've got to do is have really strong personalities in your NPCs that are very, very obvious, and they need to get directly in the way of the PCs in order to get them on board as quickly as possible. And I say when you're going to do this, I mean if you're going to do it for like a short adventure, if you're going to write something out. Otherwise, you just have to let it happen. In my world, I have things that are happening, right? And the party finds out about these things. And the things that they find out about that they're interested in, they pursue. Sometimes it's a massive magical monster on top of a mountain. Sometimes it's a village that needs to be saved. But all of this comes from the characters. So really the advice here is create NPCs that the PCs want to interact with, both positively and negatively. Make sure that they hear lots of rumors. Make sure that these NPCs get in front of the PCs. And don't constantly tempt them away with demons and dragons and piles of gold in other places, right? Make that what your campaign's about, and the players will play that. And occasionally, they'll find a treasure map, go into a deep dungeon, and slay a dragon. This is really one of those ones that I would love to hear some feedback because, again, I keep saying over and over again, but I think which is always true of any video, but it's really true in this one. I can only speak from my tables. I run lots of human-centric stuff. But for the reasons stated in the rest of the video that you heard, it's hard to make an adventure like that for you to consume. And I feel like that's probably the situation with most adventure writers. If you know of an adventure that is human scale, that has great NPCs that you can just thrust characters into and they will get right on board with it, let me know. I'd love to read through it and maybe run it. I would love to see what people do here. Besides leaving a great comment, which I know you will, check out the description. And there you're going to find links to my Discord server, lots of great people having conversations over there, my Patreon if you want to support the channel, and a link to my podcast, Monsters and Treasure, that I do with KR King from D&D Homebrew. We really are having a great time over there, so if you'd like to join us in the podcast front, check that out. I'll talk to you soon.